The year is 1880. Outside, the Moscow winter bites with a ferocity that turns breath into ice before it leaves the lips. But inside the Rumyantsev Museum, the air is still, thick with the smell of old paper, binding glue, and the dust of centuries. In the dim, flickering light of a kerosene lamp, a figure moves through the stacks. He is an old man, gaunt and bearded, wearing a coat so tattered that the local beggars often try to give him money. He sleeps on a bare wooden chest, eats only bread and tea, and refuses to have his portrait painted. To the casual observer, he looks like a holy fool, a relic of a medieval past. But this is Nikolai Fedorov, the Moscow Socrates, and in this quiet library, he is quietly dismantling the laws of nature. Sitting across from him is a young man, barely in his 20s. He leans in close, his face intense, straining to hear. He is partially deaf, a result of childhood scarlet fever. This young man is Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. To the world, he will become the father of modern rocketry, the genius who derived the rocket equation that eventually put Sputnik in orbit. But tonight, he is just a student, and the old librarian is not teaching him about physics or fuel mixtures. He is teaching him about duty, a duty so radical, so terrifying in its scope that it makes the building of cathedrals look like child's play. Fedorov whispers a thought that burns with the heat of a revelation. He argues that humanity has misunderstood its purpose. For centuries, we have accepted death as the inevitable end, a tragic punctuation mark to existence. We mourn, we bury, and we pray, hoping for a miracle from above. But Fedorov insists that this passivity is a sin. He believes that God did not give us intelligence to merely observe the universe, but to transform it. The separation of faith and science, he tells his young protege, is a false dichotomy. Science is the tool God intended for us to use to fulfill the ultimate prophecy. The philosophy of the common task, as Fedorov calls it, begins with a single uncompromising premise. Death is an error. It is a technical problem awaiting a solution. He looks at the rows of books around them, the preserved thoughts of the dead, and sees them as insufficient. It is not enough to remember our ancestors. We must resurrect them. Every human who has ever lived, every father, every mother, every forgotten child must be brought back to life, physically, tangibly. This, he argues, is the true meaning of Christian love. To let our ancestors rot in the ground while we build comfortable lives is the ultimate betrayal. The young Tsiolkovsky listens, his mind reeling. The scope of the project is impossible. Billions of souls. Where would they live? The earth is finite. It is a crowded cradle, barely able to sustain the living, let alone the resurrected armies of the past. Fedorov smiles, the candlelight dancing in his eyes. He has anticipated this objection. If the earth is too small for death to be conquered, then the earth is no longer our home. We must look up. The vast, silent blackness above the museum's roof is not a void. It is real estate. It is the new Garden of Eden waiting for its tenants. To defeat death, Fedorov declares, we must storm the heavens. We must leave this planet. It is difficult for the modern mind to reconcile the image of a rocket, that towering pillar of fire and titanium, with the quiet prayers of a mystic. We are taught to see the space race as a contest of ideologies, a Cold War chess match played with ballistic missiles and propaganda. But if we look at the sketchbooks of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky from those early years, we find something unsettling. Amidst the diagrams of thrusters and calculations of escape velocity, there are notes on the structure of angels and the sociology of ethereal beings. The geometry of space travel was not born in a vacuum of pure science. It was born as a theological necessity. Tsiolkovsky took Fedorov's mandate, the resurrection of the dead, and applied the rigors of mathematics to it. If we are to house the resurrected billions, we need habitats. If we are to reach those habitats, we need propulsion. The rocket was not designed as a weapon, nor initially as a vessel for exploration. It was designed as a transport ship for the ancestors. This transforms our understanding of the launch pad. It is not merely a piece of engineering, it is a cathedral spire built not to point at heaven, but to physically pierce it. Fedorov famously distinguished between the museum and the laboratory. He argued that our current civilization is a museum. We are curators of death. We polish the statues of our heroes, we preserve the bones of our saints, and we keep the past behind glass, static and dead. This, he claimed, was a mockery of life. He demanded that the world become a laboratory. In a laboratory, nothing is finished. Everything is subject to change, improvement, and reversal. In Fedorov's world, the graveyard is not a resting place. It is a storage facility for damaged biological data waiting for repair. This drive leads to a peculiar interpretation of the theological concept of theosis, the process of becoming like God. In Orthodox tradition, this is a spiritual transformation, a cleansing of the soul. But the Russian cosmists, as they came to be called, literalized it. To be like God is to be immortal. To be like God is to be omnipresent. Therefore, mastering the cosmos, controlling the climate, and defeating death are not acts of arrogance. They are acts of obedience. We are the hands of God, and the rocket is the chisel with which we carve our divinity. When the Bolsheviks seized power in 1917, they found themselves in a strange predicament regarding these ideas. The communists were aggressively atheist, determined to wipe out the opium of the people. Yet here was a philosophy that promised a literal heaven on earth, physical immortality, and the mastery of nature. It was perfect for their narrative of the new Soviet man, except for its deeply religious roots. So the Soviet state performed a surgical operation on history. They kept the rockets, the equations, and the dream of cosmic dominance. They celebrated Tsiolkovsky as a hero of socialist labor, but they carefully excised the reason why he built the rockets in the first place. They took the machine and hid the ghost. The Vostok rockets that would eventually carry Gagarin were essentially reliquaries stripped of their relics, flying coffins designed to cheat the grave, repurposed for a political stunt. As the 20th century roared on, the roar of the engines drowned out the whisper of the prayers. The Soviet Union became the first nation to touch the stars, sending Sputnik beeping into the void and Yuri Gagarin hurling around the planet. The official narrative was triumphantly materialist. "I see no God up here," Gagarin was rumored to have said, a quote he likely never uttered, but one that fit the state's propaganda perfectly. The cosmos was disenchanted. It was no longer the dwelling place of the resurrected ancestors. It was a high ground for surveillance satellites and a testing range for ICBMs. Yet the cosmic feeling that Fedorov spoke of proved harder to suppress. When early cosmonauts and astronauts returned to Earth, they often spoke in language that drifted uncomfortably close to mysticism. They described the overview effect, a cognitive shift that occurs when seeing the Earth from orbit, a profound sense of unity, fragility, and connectedness that dissolves political borders. It was a spiritual experience induced by machinery. The hardware was Soviet or American, but the software running into human mind remained stubbornly religious. The drive to transcend our earthly limits, to float in the abyss, reawakened the very awe that the engineers tried to calculate away. Today, the Soviet Union is a memory, and the Cold War is history, but the ghost of Nikolai Fedorov haunts a new landscape, Silicon Valley. If you look closely at the manifestos of modern transhumanists, the brochures of cryonics companies, and the long-term visions of private space colonization, you will see the philosophy of the common task staring back at you. The terminology has changed. We no longer speak of resurrection, we speak of mind uploading or reversing cellular senescence. We do not talk of the kingdom of heaven, we talk of the singularity or type 2 civilizations. But the core impulse is identical. It is a refusal to accept the biological limits of the human animal. It is the belief that with enough data, enough energy, and enough computing power, we can solve the problem of death. The private rockets lifting off from Texas and Florida today are arguably the direct descendants of those candlelight conversations in the Rumyantsev library. The billionaires funding them may not be Orthodox mystics, but they are driven by the same terror of non-existence and the same hope for a technological salvation. This brings us to the final, haunting question of the cosmists. If we succeed, if we truly conquer death and spread our consciousness across the galaxy, what becomes of us? Fedorov believed we would become divine, a unified family of the living and the resurrected. But there is a shadow side to this light. If death gives life its shape, its urgency, and its poignancy, then what is a life without end? Is the common task a noble crusade to save humanity, or is it the ultimate act of narcissism, a refusal to make room for the new by clinging endlessly to the old? As we stand on the brink of becoming a multi-planetary species, we must ask if we are bringing our humanity with us, or if we are merely launching our ghosts into the dark.